Okay, last module in this very long chapter on development. And this is module 39, looking at adulthood. So we started out prenatally, and now we have worked our way the whole way through the lifespan to adulthood. And we have three major questions we are going to answer in this module. The first one is, what are the principal kinds of physical, social, and intellectual changes that occur in early and middle adulthood, and what are their causes? So adulthood, as you can see, we're going to break up into early adulthood, middle adulthood, and then later adulthood. So in this first part, we're going to look at the physical changes, the social changes, and the intellectual changes that occur in early and middle adulthood, and what causes those changes. Second question, how does the reality of late adulthood differ from the stereotypes about that period? And then the third and final question in this chapter is, how can we adjust to death? Now, whenever we're talking about emerging adulthood, this is the period beginning in the late teenage years and extending into the mid-20s, okay? That's emerging adulthood. You're still in adolescence, but you're in very late adolescence, and you're going into your early 20s. So if you look at this module, or if you look at this figure, this is actually found at the top of page 414, and it's looking at emerging adulthood, right? So it's evidence of the period of emerging adulthood that is provided by the responses to a questionnaire that was given to various people between the ages of 18 and 25, and you feel as though you have reached adulthood. And they mostly responded yes, and then very few responded no. And then later on, that ambivalence disappeared, with most people aged 26 to 35 answering definitely yes. So you can see, right, 18 to 25, you have some yeses. Yes and no is kind of that ambivalent one, right? Yes and no. And 26 to 35, you definitely have a lot more yes and lower ambivalence. And in 36 to 55, definitely a high yes, very low ambivalence looking at that. So that was a study that was done in 2006. Now, I want to spend the next couple of slides looking at physical development in adulthood. So when you reach adulthood, you should be at the peak of your health, so to speak. So for most people, early adulthood marks the peak of physical health. But what happens is your body becomes slightly less efficient and more susceptible to disease at this point in time. The gradual changes we see become more evident, actually, though, in middle adulthood than in early adulthood. And these can be considered the signs of aging. They can be psychologically challenging in a society that actually values youth. And if you look at TV shows or magazine covers or commercials, you're actually putting this very high value on youth and not so much value on middle adulthood. The major biological change that we see occurs in middle adulthood, and that pertains to your reproductive capabilities. Now, when we are talking about this reproductive capabilities, we're really talking about menopause. And this occurs mainly for women, right? Reproductive capabilities, of course, we're talking about women. So it's the period in time when women stop menstruating, right? They stop having their menstrual cycle and they are no longer fertile. And this is usually in their late 40s or early 50s. So they will stop menstruating and they are no longer fertile. Now, menopause has a lot of negative annotations that come with it, connotations that we think of. And a lot of this is media driven, right? However, there are some serious negative effects of menopause. Some of the symptoms may be treated with hormone therapy, but this poses several significant risks to a woman's health. How women actually view menopause and their reactions to menopause can vary significantly across various cultures. For men, the aging process is much more subtle. They don't go through menopause, where you have all of these physiological changes occurring in your body. So for men, that aging is much more subtle when it comes to physical development. There is no male menopause that exists. Men remain fertile and capable of fathering children well into late adulthood. I want to change gears from physical development and I want to look at social development. This is working at life. People typically launch themselves into their careers, marriage, and families during this period. Now, there comes a point in time, usually in middle adulthood, when people start to question their lives, and we call this a midlife transition. So around this time, you can become more influential. So the idea that life will end at some point in time can become more influential in an individual's thinking. And this starts to develop what is known as a midlife crisis. However, there is very little evidence that individuals go through a midlife crisis. A lot of that is media driven with movies and TV shows. We have not found a lot of research into what we think of as a midlife crisis. What we find also is during the last stages of adulthood, people become more accepting of others and of themselves. Now, there is this point in time in adulthood where we think of marriage, children, and divorce. And all of these seem to surround what we call family. We see the changes in marriage and divorce trends have doubled in the number of single parent households in the United States over the last 20 years. So it has become much more common to get a divorce and be a single parent household in the last 20 years than what it was previously. Of first marriages, 39% of those end in divorce. So we're not at half, but we are approaching half. When we think about single parent households, they are often economically less well off, which then has an impact on their children's opportunities. Most of the evidence suggests, however, that children from single parent families are no less well adjusted than those from two parent families. So even though they may have less economic opportunities, that doesn't mean that they're less well adjusted. Those are two different things. So regardless of whether there is two parents or one parent, though, harmony is much better than conflict. And that should go without saying. That should not be too surprising. Let's look at the changing roles of men and women. More women carry more roles, right? Or women carry more roles than men do. So there are more women that act simultaneously as wives, as mothers, and as wage earners. The second shift, additional work that is performed by women with a career and home responsibilities. So the first shift is that they go to their career, they go to their job, and then they start their second shift job, which is when they come home and they prepare dinner and they do laundry and they help kids with their homework and they take them here and there to various events, right? So women actually work a two-shift job more so than men do. Now, let's move into later adulthood. So the later years of life and growing old. We have this stereotype in society of old age, and it's a time of inactivity and physical and mental decline. But again, remember, this is a stereotype. It doesn't mean that it's actually true, but it's what a lot of people generalize older individuals to have. Gerontologists, however, are finding that there are significant developmental processes that continue on even until old age. As people are living longer, the absolute numbers of people within older adulthood will continue to increase also. People are living much longer lives than what they did years ago. We see this in this slide, figure 2, and this is at the top of page 418. So you see on the x-axis is the year, right, starting with 1910 and then going forward to 2050. And then we have the percentages here. The projections suggest that by the year 2050, more than 20% of the population will be over the age of 65, right? So the percentage of people over the age of 65 and the percentage of the US population younger than 65. So younger than 65 is in the purple color and over the age of 65 is in the green color. So people are living longer. And that's going to continue to increase as time goes on. Let's now think about some of the physical changes in late adulthood and how your body is actually aging. The relatively non-strenuous activities of late adulthood are virtually identical to those favored by college students, which is really interesting, right? So the non-strenuous activities of late adulthood are the same as what college students really want to be also. So you have this same physical activity between college students and late adulthood. There are, however, many physical changes that are taking place in late adulthood. We have this genetic program theory of aging. And this states that our DNA, which is our genetic code, includes this built-in time limit to the reproduction of human cells, and that those human cells are no longer able to divide after a certain time. So we said that you will continue to develop new cells from before birth until the time you die. But our DNA determines when that period of time is when you are no longer developing cells. Those cells are no longer dividing. That's this genetic programming theory of aging. There's also what is called the wear and tear theory of aging. And this is where the mechanical functions of the body simply stop working efficiently. When we look at the cognitive changes during later adulthood, there's an intellectual decline that is often not evident in healthy older adults. And the patterns of decline are not uniform. It's not as though everyone goes through the same cognitive decline. And if you're a healthy older adult, you may not see any of these intellectual declines. There are skills related to fluid intelligence. Remember, information processing skills that typically decline in late adulthood. However, the skills related to crystallized intelligence, the knowledge that we gain through experience and things like that, those remain steady, and in some cases, they actually improve. So there's definitely this difference in the skills related to fluid intelligence and the skills related to crystallized intelligence. And people are often able to compensate for any sort of decline. The learning may just take more time than what it would have maybe previously taken. Now, this slide shows us the age-related changes in intellectual skills that vary according to the specific cognitive ability in question. And you can see this at the top of page 420. Here you have along the x-axis the age and the mean scores that individuals scored on these various specific cognitive abilities. So inductive reasoning, spatial orientation, perceptual speed, right? You see that high and then it really starts to decline. It looks as though numeric ability declines the lowest. It may be also the fastest. If we look at, I think this is verbal ability, which is this one, which is kind of like the golden color, that actually doesn't decline that much. And it goes with saying that people, you actually reach your peak verbal ability in your 50s and 60s. And if you think about it, that actually makes sense because there is so much learning that has occurred during your lifetime, and all of that learning has actually made you learn new words. And so your verbal ability, that's why I think a lot of older individuals are so good at crossword puzzles, because they have this vast verbal knowledge. They're also really great at games of Scrabble. Now, one thing that we do tend to see is memory decline in late adulthood. So memory changes in late adulthood. Are older adults forgetful? Now, most evidence suggests that memory change is not an inevitable part of the aging process. It does occur a lot, but it's not inevitable that everyone is going to have a bad memory. Where there are deficits in memory, they tend to be limited to episodic memories. So memories for specific experiences. So for cases of memory decline that is accompanied by other cognitive difficulties, the word senility or becoming senile, that is now considered imprecise. We no longer believe in that. Now, one thing that we do tend to see in adulthood, one disorder that we tend to see more than others, is Alzheimer's disease. And as we mentioned previously, this is a progressive brain disorder. So it is going to get worse over time. There is no cure for Alzheimer's disease. And it leads to this gradual and irreversible decline in cognitive abilities. What we know is that the beta amyloid precursor protein tends to go awry in individuals with Alzheimer's disease. Through recent research, we know that it deals with this protein, the beta amyloid precursor protein. What happens in Alzheimer's is that your brain actually shrinks. Neurons are dying, and areas of the hippocampus and frontal and temporal lobes actually deteriorate. And they deteriorate to the point that you can no longer survive. That's what happens eventually to individuals that have Alzheimer's disease. Now, the last type of development, or I don't know if we want to call it development so much anymore, but we want to talk about the social world of late adulthood. You're old, but you're not always so alone. Now, loneliness may be more likely, but it's not inevitable. Not everyone who reaches late adulthood is alone. So it's not inevitable that you are lonely. There is what's called this disengagement theory of aging. Successful aging is characterized by a gradual withdrawal from the world on physical, psychological, and social levels. So that is this disengagement theory. However, there is very little research that supports this theory. It is a theory that's out there, but there is very little research that actually supports it. We have this activity theory of aging, where there is successful aging that is characterized by maintaining the interests and activities that you had earlier on in life. You still like to do those same things. And then we have this life review, where it's the process by which people examine and evaluate their lives. They look back and they take stock of what they've done in their life. Now, we started off prenatally, and we come to the end of our life, which is death. And this is inevitable. Everyone will eventually die. So how do you adjust to death? That's what this is asking. For those who are fully aware that they are dying and have the time to evaluate their death, Elisabeth Kubler-Ross is this well-known researcher that proposed that individuals go through 5 broad stages of death and dying. Now, Kubler-Ross set this up for the individual who is dying, but I think this is definitely also applied to those living also around the person is dying. I think they go through these same 5 stages of death and dying. Now, on pages 422 and 423, you can read more in depth about these 5 stages that Kubler-Ross came up with. But these are the 5 stages that she said individuals go through when they are dying. So the first stage is denial. The second stage is anger. The third stage is bargaining. Fourth stage is depression. And then the 5th stage is acceptance. And like I said, there's a small section with each of these in your textbook that describes them a little bit more in depth. Now, I do want to note that not everyone experiences each stage in the same way. There is a variety of life factors that have an impact on how individuals respond to death. This may be culturally, this may be the ways that you were raised, this may be spiritually.